In the early 1990s, Fred Tokars was a prominent figure in Atlanta, known for his legal prowess and connections in political circles. But as Sara Tokars would soon discover, the man who was respected by many harbored secrets that would eventually destroy their family. As Sara began to unravel the truth about her husband's illicit activities, she unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would lead to her untimely and brutal demise. This is the story of how a family's dream life became a nightmare of betrayal, where the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Fred Tokars had built his reputation as a successful attorney, specializing in criminal defense and tax law. He had a sharp mind, a persuasive personality, and a network of powerful connections. But behind the facade of respectability, Fred was deeply involved in criminal enterprises. He laundered money for drug dealers and mafia figures, using his legal expertise to shield his activities from the authorities. As his involvement in these underworld dealings grew, so did his greed and paranoia. Sara Tokars, a devoted mother and wife, began to notice changes in Fred. He became increasingly secretive, his behavior more erratic. She stumbled upon evidence of his criminal activities, financial records, coded messages, and strange phone calls that hinted at something far more sinister than just tax evasion. Fearful for her safety and that of her children, Sara began documenting everything, secretly amassing a file of evidence that could expose Fred's illegal dealings. As Sara's suspicions grew, so did Fred's paranoia. He sensed that Sara was onto him and knew that if she ever went to the authorities, his carefully constructed empire would crumble. Fred was no stranger to eliminating threats, but this time, the threat was his own wife. The thought of losing his wealth, power, and reputation drove him to a chilling conclusion. Sara had to be silenced permanently. Fred Tokars, calculating and cold, decided that the only way to protect himself was to eliminate Sara. He began to plot her demise, reaching out to contacts in the criminal underworld to find someone willing to carry out the act. He eventually found his man in Eddie Lawrence, a low-level criminal with a long rap sheet and a desperate need for money. Fred promised Lawrence a substantial sum to stage a robbery that would end in Sara's murder, making it look like a random act of violence. On November 29, 1992, Sara Tokars and her two sons, Ricky and Mike, were returning home from a Thanksgiving weekend trip. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, a man forced his way into their car at gunpoint. The children watched in terror as the intruder ordered Sara to drive to a secluded area. Once there, he made her kneel in the back seat, pulling out a shotgun and pressing it to her head. In a single, brutal moment, he pulled the trigger, killing Sara instantly. The boys, traumatized and covered in their mother's blood, ran for help, their innocent lives shattered by the violence they had just witnessed. What initially appeared to be a tragic robbery gone wrong quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of deceit, greed, and betrayal that pointed directly to Fred Tokars as the mastermind behind his wife's murder. The truth was shocking. A respected attorney, driven by power and paranoia, had orchestrated the execution of his own wife. The investigation and subsequent trial would reveal the depths of Fred's depravity and the lengths he went to protect his secrets. The murder of Sara Tokars sent shockwaves through the community. The brutality of the crime, coupled with the fact that her young sons had witnessed it, made headlines across the nation. Initially, investigators considered it a botched robbery, but as they interviewed friends, family, and associates of the Tokars, a darker picture began to emerge. Sara's friends revealed that she had been living in fear, confiding in them about Fred's criminal activities and her plans to leave him. Investigators soon learned that Sara had been gathering evidence against Fred, fearing for her life and the safety of her children. The breakthrough came when Eddie Lawrence, the man hired to kill Sara, was caught and confessed to the crime. But what stunned investigators was Lawrence's admission that he had been hired by none other than Fred Tokars. Lawrence detailed the plot, revealing how Fred had meticulously planned his wife's murder to look like a robbery gone wrong. He provided evidence of the payments Fred had made and the instructions he had given to ensure Sara's death. The case against Fred was growing stronger by the day. Fred Tokars' trial became one of the most sensational legal battles in Atlanta's history. The courtroom was packed with media, all eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once been a pillar of the community. The prosecution laid out a damning case, presenting evidence of Fred's criminal activities, his plans to murder Sara, and the testimony of Eddie Lawrence, who described in chilling detail how Fred had orchestrated the entire crime. The defense tried to paint Fred as a victim of circumstance, claiming that Lawrence had acted on his own and that Fred was being framed. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sara's friends and family testified about the fear she had lived in and the lengths she had gone to protect her children. The jury was presented with the financial records, the coded messages, and the testimony of experts who linked Fred to the criminal enterprises he had tried so desperately to conceal. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Fred Tokars guilty of orchestrating his wife's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But while justice had been served, the scars left by the tragedy would never fully heal. Fred's actions had not only taken Sara's life but had also destroyed the lives of his two sons, who were forced to grow up without their mother and with the knowledge that their father had orchestrated her death. The Tokars tragedy left a lasting impact on those involved and the community at large. It was a stark reminder of how greed and the pursuit of power can corrupt even those who seem to have it all. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of those who dare to stand up against powerful figures and the lengths to which such individuals will go to protect their empires. The story of the Tokars family is not just about murder. It is about the dark side of ambition, the betrayal of trust, and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. Ricky and Mike Tokars, the two young boys who witnessed their mother's murder, were left to grapple with the trauma of that night. Their lives would never be the same, marked by the loss of their mother and the betrayal of their father. They were placed in the care of their maternal grandmother, who tried to provide them with a sense of normalcy. But the shadow of that fateful night would follow them for the rest of their lives. Both boys struggled with the emotional and psychological scars left by the tragedy, facing years of therapy and challenges in their attempts to move forward. The public was captivated by the Tokars case, not just because of the crime itself, but because of what it represented, a dark side of the American dream, where ambition and greed led to the ultimate betrayal. The media coverage was intense, with every detail of the case being scrutinized and analyzed. The story of Fred Tokars, the lawyer who turned to murder to protect his secrets, became a cautionary tale of how far someone could fall when driven by the need to maintain power and control. Fred Tokars spent the rest of his life in prison, a far cry from the luxury and power he once enjoyed. In 2020, he died behind bars, his legacy forever tarnished by the heinous crime he orchestrated. Despite his conviction, Fred never admitted to his role in the murder, maintaining his innocence until the end. His death marked the final chapter in a saga that had gripped the nation for nearly 3 decades. The Tokars case remains a poignant reminder of the destructive power of greed and the lengths to which some will go to protect their interests. It also serves as a testament to the resilience of those left behind to pick up the pieces, particularly Ricky and Mike, who, despite the trauma they endured, have worked to rebuild their lives. The story of the Tokars family continues to be studied and discussed, both for its legal complexities and its psychological impact. It is a story of power, betrayal, and the tragic consequences that can arise when ambition turns deadly.